Your next witness?
Next witness, Your Honor, we'd like to call Tracey Jacobs. She is also by deposition designation and begins with me.
I'm sorry. One more time?
Yeah, Your Honor, we'd like to call Tracey Jacobs. She's also by deposition designation, and it begins with me
All right.
asking questions.
All right, thank you.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Tracey Renee Jacobs, Los Angeles, California,
And what is your current occupation?
talent agent.
And how long have you been a talent agent?
34 years.
Ms. Jacobs, when did you first begin representing Mr. Depp?
When I was at another agency at ICM, I think I represented him 30 years. So now, since he's been gone almost 5 years, you can subtract 35 years. And then when I came to UTA, I believe it was 1998, he came with me. And I've been at UTA for, well, now it's been 22 years, minus the last 4. He was with me from the beginning.
During the time that you represented Mr. Depp as his talent agent, please describe the types of jobs and responsibilities you performed for him.
I was his agent, so my job, as all agents are, was to find, procure, and negotiate jobs for him, acting jobs for him initially.
Well, I'm assuming if you were his talent agent that you would know how his career was tracking over that 30 years you were with him, would you not?
He became the biggest star in the world.
And do you take any credit for that?
Yes.
And why? What do you think your contributions were to Mr. Depp becoming the biggest star in the world?
Well, A, that he was extraordinarily talented, and B, that my talent was compatible with his in terms of understanding the kinds of roles and scripts and filmmakers that would make sense for him to work with, and being able to master the two and put them together.
What is your understanding of the reason why Mr. Depp terminated you?
I really don't know. All I know is he terminated essentially everyone in his life, so I was along for the ride, I guess.
Line 20 said, I'm directing your attention to line 20 of Mr. Depp's deposition on November 2020. And why did you leave Tracey Jacobs in October 2016? Go down. And Mr. Depp's answer was, Ms. Jacobs, in the same attempt to corral the thievery and the injustice that was practiced upon me by Mr. Mandel and Mr. Bloom, at a certain point, Tracey Jacobs began to sort of become revealed as, I won't say co-conspirator necessarily, but she was part of that little group. And it seemed in my best interest to walk away from that relationship because her interests were quite different than when we started. I believe she even stated that the reason she kept me for so long was, the quote, was the money. She stated otherwise, she said, I was not an easy client to represent or something to that extent. And so, yes, I had to leave the agency. Would you agree with Mr. Depp's characterization of your representation of him?
Oh, I understand it. This is the first time I'm hearing or seeing this in 5 years. No, is the answer.
And why do you not agree with this?
Because it's all untrue.
And then I asked him, after asking if he sued you, and he said no. He did sue Mr. Mandel and Jake Bloom, so I thought it was prudent to ask. Then I asked him, did Tracey Jacobs say why she did not consider you to be an easy client to represent? And she certainly she never expressed any of those things to me. These are things that she was able, I guess, she came to the realization that I was not easy to represent after I fired her. But Ms. Jacobs, there was conflicts of interest all over the place. She had been represented by Joel Mandel. She was also to some degree represented by Jake Bloom. So therefore, there was an obvious, great, huge conflict of interest, which I lived with for a little while and thought, no, it's not a good idea. Now, my question to you is, do you agree with Mr. Depp's characterization that you only expressed that he was a difficult client to work for after he fired you?
Absolutely not.
Do you agree that you had conflicts of interest all over the place in representing Mr. Depp, as he states here?
No.
Do you agree that you had been represented by Joel Mandel?
Nope. Never.
Was Mr. Depp a difficult client to represent?
He wasn't initially, and it became far more complicated in the last 10 years of my representing him.
And how did it become far more complicated in the last 10 years you represented him?
His unprofessional behavior.
Anything else?
I think that covers a multitude of things.
And that's going to be my next question. What do you mean by Mr. Depp's unprofessional behavior in the last 10 years of your representation?
Showing up late to set consistently on virtually every movie. I would get yelled at. I never said to him, "You're a difficult client." I never used those words, but I was very honest with him and said, "You've got to stop doing this. This is hurting you." And it did. And yeah.
Did, even with your speaking to Mr. Depp about him consistently showing up late for set, did he correct that behavior during that last 10 years?
No.
And what types of difficulties did that cause for Mr. Depp?
Well, initially, crews loved him because he was always so great with the crew, but crews don't love sitting around for hours and hours and hours waiting for the star of the movie to show up. And it also got around town. I mean, people talk. It's a small community. And it made people reluctant to use him toward the end.
And when you say toward the end, was that toward the end of your representation of Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you recall difficulties that Mr. Depp had during Pirates 5?
Yes.
Did you have just one conversation with Sean Bailey, or did you have more than one conversation with Sean Bailey about Mr. Depp and Pirates 5?
More than one, I'm sure. I don't recall.
Okay. Do you have a recollection of the production of Pirates 5 having to suspend for several weeks while Mr. Depp had surgery on his finger?
Yes.
Did you go to Australia at any point during the filming of Pirates 5?
Twice.
Yes. Was there something that caused you to determine that that was the time you should get on the plane and fly to Australia?
Yes.
What do you recall that being?
The complaints about what I stated earlier about the lateness, not showing up to talk to him about it.
When you were talking earlier about there being a change in Mr. Depp's behavior over the last 10 years of your representation and it becoming more unprofessional, was part of the unprofessional behavior his increased use of alcohol and drugs?
Yes.
Was part of the unprofessional behavior that you witnessed increasing over the last 10 years of your representation of Mr. Depp his increasing anger and tendency towards violence?
No.
Do you know who referred Dr. Kipper to Mr. Depp?
I did.
And why did you refer Dr. Kipper to Mr. Depp?
He has had a lot of experience with high-profile people and really helping them seriously get and stay sober.
Did you observe in your dealings with Mr. Depp as his representative that he romanticized the entire drug culture?
Yes.
I'm asking for your observations based on your dealings with Mr. Depp. Was it your observation that Mr. Depp had fundamental issues with anger?
Actually,
Yeah.
lack of
And in your observation of Mr. Depp having fundamental issues with anger, did that worsen over the time of your representation, or was it relatively the same?
Yes. It worsened over time.
Did you observe Mr. Depp lacking patience when he didn't get his needs met?
Yes, but yes.
Do you recall a time while you were representing Mr. Depp that he started having earpieces so people could feed him his lines during filming?
Yes.
Recall that became a regular thing for Mr. Depp, that he needed to use earpieces for lines being fed to him during films.
Yes.
Do you have a recollection of issues associated with London Fields?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at Deposition Exhibit number 8. Ms. Jacobs, I'll take you to the second page first so you can just read the frame. And there's really just a part there. And then here's where I'm going to direct your attention. This is from Mr. Depp to you on Saturday, August 29, 2015. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Depp, when Mr. Depp would write to you in emails, would he regularly have parts of it all capitals and exclamation marks?
Yes.
Harley's, he says fucking Harley. What is he talking about?
I think he's referring to, I don't know. I think he might be referring to the daughter of a director friend of his, but I'm not sure.
So do you have an understanding of what he's talking about with the Matthew Cullen version?
Matthew Cullen was the director. I don't know about nudity, although clearly that was the case according to his understanding. And I guess he was trying to get me to kill it.
Okay. And then you responded to him, I'm already on it with lawyers and Marty Singer. I've spoken to Matthew Cullen twice this AM. He also wants it stopped. We are doing everything to shut this down. Was there another version of London?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to correct myself. He made a typo here, which is why Harley, he means Hanley. They were the producers.
And as you sit here today, can you recall anyone at Disney committing in any way that Johnny Depp would be in Pirates 6?
No.
You testified at the beginning of this deposition that while you represented Mr. Depp, he was, I think, the biggest star in the world. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And what would you say the reputation of Johnny Depp is today?
These lawsuits don't help.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's endless, but I don't know because I'm not out there selling him anymore.
Have you ever seen Mr. Depp engage in angry behavior?
Yes.
Now, were you aware that Mr. Depp filed a lawsuit in the United Kingdom against the Sun newspapers and Dan Wooten, the editor, because they called him a wife beater?
Yes.
Have you ever seen Mr. Depp hit a woman?
Objection?
Have you ever seen Mr. Depp throw anything at a woman?
No.
Have you ever seen Mr. Depp hit a woman?
No.
Other than Amber Heard, do you know of any other woman who ever accused Mr. Depp of physical abuse?
No.
Have you ever seen in person any marks on Amber Heard?
No.
Ms. Jacobs, you testified, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that in the last 10 years of your representation of Mr. Depp, there was more unprofessional behavior by Mr. Depp. Is that correct?
Yes.
During that period of time, the last 10 years you represented him, was he ever fired from a movie?
No.
Have you ever seen this document before?
I don't recall this exact document, but I know there were conversations going on.
What were you referring to when you said at the top of this document, Depp Exhibit 5, this is good news?
That we were able to help him out when he was in financial desperation.
When you say help him out, who is him?
Johnny Depp.
And what particularly was good news?
That we were able to secure a loan for him through Bank of America when Ed White couldn't get him any money. And it was very helpful to him.
What was the final deal for Murder on the Orient Express?
$5 million for 4 consecutive weeks, plus a great back end, which he has received significant money on subsequently.
What was Mr. Depp's upfront compensation for Pirates 5?
Yeah, he got paid $25 million with the back end.
Would it be fair to say that you cannot say one way or the other whether Mr. Depp has hit, punched, kicked, headbutted, or choked Amber Heard?
Yes.
Can you say one way or the other whether Mr. Depp has ever hit, punched, kicked, headbutted, or choked anyone else? Yes. Can you say one way or the other? Do you know?
No.
Would it be fair to say that you were continuing to bring in good, solid work for Mr. Depp right up to the time Mr. Depp terminated you?
Correct, yes.
Earlier you said that Mr. Depp's reputation, that he became the greatest actor in the world, right?
That's not what I said, but I said he became the biggest movie star in the world.
Movie star, thank you, forgive me. So, as of the time that you were terminated by Mr. Depp in October 2016, did you still believe that Mr. Depp was the greatest movie star in the world?
No,
Why not?
because his star had dimmed due to it getting harder to get him jobs, given the reputation that he had acquired due to his lateness and other things.
And what were the other things?
Just, people were talking and the question was out there about his behavior.
And that behavior included,
I think I've described it several times.
would that behavior include alcohol and drug use?
Yes.
Mr. Chu asked you about City of Lies, and you indicated that you didn't believe it was released. Are you aware that Mr. Depp was accused of punching a local manager in the face during the filming of City of Lies?
Objection.
I read that. I don't know.
Do you have any understanding of why Mr. Depp needed that loan in January of 2016?
Yes, he had said he had come in and met with us, and he had asked for $20 million.
Did Mr. Depp tell you when he met with you why he needed $20 million?
Not specifically, other than he just needed the money.
Was there any general discussion as to why he needed $20 million in January of 2016?
Not as to why, he just expected us to do it.
So Mr. Depp came in and said, I want you to get $20 million for me?
Actually, it was, I want you to give me $20 million. It was not discussed, the question was not asked as a loan.
And what did you say in response?
I didn't. Jeremy Zimmer and Jim Burkus spoke directly to that point. I was just in the meeting.
And in the meeting, do you recall what Jeremy and Jim said to Mr. Depp when he asked them for $20 million?
Yes, they said we're not in a position to give our clients that kind of money. We're not a bank.
Did Mr. Depp explain why he thought that you should just give him $20 million as opposed to loan?
Yes.
What
He felt that it had made a lot of money for us and that we should just do it because of how much money he had made over the duration of his being at UTA.
you ever had any other client who's ever made that kind of a demand?
No.
And do you believe the Rolling Stones interview, the article, damaged Mr. Depp's reputation?
Action.
Are you aware of any significant role that Mr. Depp has starred in since you were terminated that you did not negotiate and get for him?
No.
Did Mr. Depp get The Invisible Man?
They didn't make it. They made it much lower budget with a woman, as it turns out, for Universal with Blumhouse.
You were asked about whether there was any option contract for Pirate 6. And I just want to make sure I understand your answer. Were you involved in any kind of negotiation with Disney for any kind of option contract for Pirate 6 with Mr. Depp?
Not that I can recall. No.